Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios in Johannesburg. Welcome to this evening's episode of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko. On the show tonight, hot off the press, parliamentarians agree to look into the circumstances surrounding Jacob Zuma's parole. We speak to some of the key players. And with many South Africans still reeling from the shock of discovering how the release of the former president was arrived at, thanks to that interview we broadcast last night here on the show, we try to understand South Africa's parole system. And later on, we speak to the body constitutionally mandated to investigate, monitor, and evaluate the organization and administration of the public service. At a briefing earlier today, they painted a rather unflattering picture of how the state is run in many instances. That and more coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. The Democratic Alliance today wrote to Parliament's Correctional Services and Justice Committee asking that Parliament set up a meeting where they would look into the circumstances surrounding former President Jacob Zuma's parole. The Watchdog team understands that this now has the support of the biggest two parties in that committee, which in all likelihood means that that is now going to happen, pending, of course, a number of things that would still have to be ironed out, especially given that Parliament tomorrow is supposed to close to allow MPs to go and campaign for their respective political parties. But we're going to bring you up to speed with this development in a short while. But for now, though, let's look at the South Africa's parole system. I think that was thrown up by that interview we did last night with the Correctional Services Commissioner, Mr. Fraser. Let's welcome Mr. Given Matlombe, who is a criminal lawyer, as well as Nabila Mia, who is an attorney from Lawyers for Human Rights. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for coming through this evening. I don't know if you watched the interview that we did last night, which of course has been trending since. Have you?
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to your viewers. Vuyo, unfortunately, I was on the road. I was not in a position to watch yesterday's interview, but I did follow the news this morning. I am up to speed of what is happening. Yes, Vuyo, I'm not sure if you will permit me to start with the system of parole.
Maybe before you do that, just to refresh the minds of people who actually watched it, so as to focus our discussion a little bit. We're going to play a little soundbite from what the Commissioner of Correctional Services had to say on this matter during that interview that we had with him yesterday. Take a listen.
With regard to any person that has to take parole, there's procedures, there's law. He was placed on medical parole. He came into our facility. We have a responsibility to provide security and care. And as in all instances, when we admit a person into our facility, we make sure that we do a full assessment, including a health assessment. You see, when you do the assessments, you'll then know what type of care must be given. So when we deal with care, we deal with even your dietary requirements. So every offender that is incarcerated at this department will have to be able to give a history of themselves, both health and otherwise. And then we assess how do we categorize them and where we are able to place them. This was in the same process. The same process applied. I think what I know happened after that at the onset, he declared his comorbidities. But additional to that, because he was still under the care of the South African Military Health Services, they had also provided us an assessment on his first day of admission. So that is when we realized that we've got a person in our custody who actually is frail. So I think that's maybe the first point. We had then received further reports, medical reports, that indicated that he requires specialized treatment. And it was only around the third report that we received where his medical team, the medical team in conjunction with our team, indicated that he can no longer be kept in our facility because the type of care, medical care required, we are not able to provide. And this assessment is made with every other offender that we have in our facilities. Our doctors, our nurses will write referrals to the head of center and say, we've got the situation, please transfer.
Nabila, up to that point, just from that part of the explanation, what can you say? Does it sound like there is anything untoward, unusual to you?
Well, Commissioner, thank you very much for having me on your show, and good evening to you all. From what Commissioner Fraser was saying, it is correct that every prisoner that gets admitted into a correctional center must undergo a medical examination. So on that front, it is correct. And if they have certain conditions, whether they be infectious or non-infectious conditions, those must be recorded and in the appropriate register. And the reason for this is that the Department of Correctional Services, while a prisoner is under their care, is obligated to provide adequate medical services and adequate medical treatment. Mm-hmm. And in order to do so, they need to be apprised of a prisoner's full medical condition.
Mm-hmm. And then he says that on the basis of that, they then discovered that he requires special treatment. So what usually happens then when a prisoner requires what he calls, requires special treatment, as he said? As far as you know, Nabila?
As far as I know, as I said, the department is obligated to provide the adequate health services and medical treatment mm-hmm. for every prisoner's condition that they have. Mm-hmm. And they must do so to the best of their ability. In fact, the legislation prescribes that it must be done on the same level as the government is able to do to the public. Mm-hmm. So in terms of special treatment per se, it's very unclear as to what Commissioner Fraser means by that and whether that then prompted further medical intervention, because the procedures for medical parole are very specific, and it's unclear whether he's saying that triggered consideration for medical parole, because there are very specific conditions that need to be followed if medical parole is to be applied for.
Okay, we're not there yet, because I want us to, take the politics out of this for a second. And then secondly, I want us to understand, because the whole point of this conversation is for us to try and understand the parole system in South Africa and how it works. Given from what you heard there, the commissioner saying, they did an assessment, looked at the type of care that he would need, discovered that he requires, as he calls it, special treatment. Just on the basis of that, does it sound to you, like I'm asking the same question I asked Nabila, that up to that point, there is anything unusual, untoward, strange?
Vuyo, from where I'm sitting, I think the word that the commissioner is using, that the determination was based on that he required a special treatment, I don't think that is an appropriate word. Mm-hmm. Medical parole is designed for one thing, for only individuals who are terminally ill, individuals who are near their death, those that we are sending home to say, go and die a dignified death. Mm-hmm. That was the whole purpose of a medical parole. That's mm-hmm. why we have a medical parole. We don't want you to die in an undignified manner in prison. Mm-hmm. So as far as a special treatment, that is not a key. That was not, the parole system is not meant for that. It's not meant for people who require special treatment to be mm-hmm. sent home. Mm-hmm. The whole purpose of it is that you are about to die, go home and die surrounded by loved ones. Mm-hmm.
And just for clarity, and just for clarity, because sometimes we use the words interchangeably, my understanding of what he meant by special treatment was that he needs treatment that would be specialized, not necessarily preferential treatment. I just want to make sure that we're together on that one. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed. A special treatment, that means it's a treatment that is specialized. But the yes. question is, we're not privy to that medical report that is relying on.
Yeah.
We are not aware what is so special about this treatment that is required. Can't it be provided in the correctional facility?
Yes. Which treatment
only be
mm-hmm. which then given he went to, which was another part of what he said. He then says, having realized that he would require this specialized treatment, they then looked at, the state of the prison and then realized that he could no longer be kept in prison because the prison won't be able to give him that special treatment that he needs or deserves. And I want you to bring that point again about the whole point of medical parole now having, added this third leg or third part of what he said, which was that the prison itself cannot be able to give him the treatment that he would need. Your comment on that, given what you know about, the whole point or purpose, of giving somebody medical parole. Given?
Unfortunately, Vuyo, I will repeat again. The commissioner is in possession of certain report from the experts that us as member of public were not privy to it. We do not know what is this special treatment that is relying on. So it will be difficult for me to even dispute it or to even agree with the minister if there's such condition that mm-hmm. will require special treatment. Mm-hmm. If, for instance, that report that relied on, it could easily be made available, public can have access to it, of which I doubt if that is, because that will be an infringement of the former president's right to privacy as far as his medical records are concerned. So it's something that it's only until he gives reasons, because he is required to give reasons as to what report he relied on and whether the decision that he took based on that report was reasonable. So at this stage, it will be difficult for me to say, because I'm not aware, only the commissioner is aware of the report that he relied on before he approves such parole or before he overrule his members who were of a different view. Okay. So the minister is in possession of a certain report. It appears from the news that I'm following that the committee that was supposed to give him this report, or the medical experts, they were overruled by him. So unless if the commissioner, he had an independent report to the report that his body had, is then that, but at this stage, we are all in the dark. We do not know what report.
Let's bring him back, where he now talks about what the board did and what he subsequently did on the back of, decided on the back of what the board told him. Take a listen.
For medical parole, because they indicated that he was in a stable condition. What I need to indicate, when the medical advisory board provided those recommendations, I had then, the head of the center, who has the authority to decide, then reviewed the information available and then indicated that the conditions, based on all the reports that we have, require us to release the former president. I then rescinded those delegations, because it's original delegations that's with me that I had delegated to. I rescinded that, and I took the decision then to place him on medical parole, and I'd given a host of reasons. The reasons is available, it's in documentation, and it will be presented to whoever need to see that. I'm sure Parliament will be asking to
I'm confident it will stand whatever scrutiny.
It's legal and procedural.
So you didn't hear the first part. The first part of that bite said the board did not approve. That's what the commissioner said. The board did not approve because they indicated that he was in a stable condition. So that's what the board said. But he then reviewed the information, as he says, and then decided, having considered everything, that after all, the original delegation rests with me. These are his words, right? That's when he decided that he's going to let him go home. And he says it's perfectly legal and procedural. Now, as you say, given we don't have the benefit of the actual report, Parliament's going to look into this, I've just been told. But just from what he says there, your thoughts?
Vuyo, my issue with the commissioner on this specific aspect is that he keep on referring to himself as I have had to overrule. The regulation is clear. The power to release an offender on medical parole, it does not vest on one individual, not the commissioner alone. The commissioner needs to take the recommendation of CMC. Here it was CMC that we call a parole board, a case management committee. Because if you look, the former president was serving less than 2 years of sentence. That means the CMC, Case Management Committee, or let me refer to them as a parole board, they were supposed to give recommendation to the commissioner. Those recommendations,
which they did, except he says that the law actually, or the rules actually allow him. He has discretion. In other words, he can say, "Okay, I heard what you are saying, but this is what my decision is." Do you not accept that fact? The fact that he has some leeway, latitude, the rules actually allow him to do so.
No, that is exactly where I disagree with the commissioner assertion that he had an absolute rule, he had an absolute power to determine or to veto what the parole board was saying. That cannot be correct. The rules are clear, is that they are not centered only on the commissioner alone. The parole board need to, the information that they provide to the commissioner need to be taken into account. Otherwise, they are useless. That means they have to be disbanded. If we go according to the logic that the commissioner is arguing, that means we do not need a parole board anymore. We might as well make a telephone call to the commissioner to say, "Commissioner, we've got a sick person. What do you want to do with that person?" The commissioner, and then make decision as an individual. So it cannot be correct that the powers vest on him to veto or to overrule the parole board. The powers vest on both these parties. Here we've got two parties. We've got the commissioner. We've got also have a parole board. All they play a role. Not only the commissioner, but the commissioner is creating impression to the public that the powers vest on him. Yes, the powers is vest on him to put a signature, but he needs to take into account what his committee is saying. That's all where I disagree with him.
Now, Nabila, I mean, this is what we're all grappling with. What Given has just said, because these parole boards are set up, as I said, to adjudicate on these matters and not to simply, offer opinions. Otherwise, it then means that there's a problem with the whole system. And in setting them up, serious consideration is paid to, the skills, the expertise, and so on of the people who have to fill these board positions. Among other things, these boards have to have people who are medically and otherwise competent to actually take appropriate decisions. In the event, let's say, let me first start by asking whether you agree with that.
I agree completely with that. As I said before, the medical parole procedures are specific for a reason. It requires certain medical reports to be provided. It requires those reports to be provided to the medical advisory board. It requires the medical advisory board to do its own independent report on this topic. And if you look at who constitutes the medical advisory board, it's, as you say, a number of professionals, because, as you know, we all have to look at the limits of our expertise. And the reason you constitute a board with experts is so that they are able to make informed decisions and informed recommendations. And if you look at the nature of the reports that are required for purposes of medical parole, you'll see that they're quite extensive in terms of what information is required to be put in those reports. And I think what's interesting is that... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying continue. Sorry. I thought you were finishing your point there.
No, yeah, my point there is that, the whole purpose of the power of and the expertise of the medical advisory board is who constitutes it and their ability to make an informed recommendation to the national commissioner or the parole board or the minister on the issue of parole.
Listening to a lot of people over the past 24 hours, it would seem that people accept, well, it is indeed true that the commissioner does indeed have the power to do what he has done, except that that decision, or whatever decision it takes, which goes against what the medical parole board would have recommended, must pass a rationality test. But here's what I'm trying to understand. If that is indeed the case, right, or assuming that is indeed the case, the question I'm asking myself is, what would have been the thinking of our legislators, right, when they decided to give an official like the Correctional Services Commissioner, right, who is not a medical practitioner or is not really well versed in the areas that these experts who form the board, I would have. I mean, why would they give him so much discretion and power? What could have been? And this is perhaps in the realm of speculation here. But I was thinking of what could have been their rationale. What would they have wanted to achieve? Why would they allow such a loophole, if indeed it is a loophole? Any thoughts, Nabila?
I see your point in using the word loophole but in fact I see it quite differently, because at the end of the day, the Department of Correctional Services is the party that cares for prisoners. Prisoners are under the care and supervision of the Department of Correctional Services, which are made up of various decision makers in the National Commissioner, the Supervision and Parole Boards, and the Minister of Justice being a part of those decision makers. I think, and again, we're in the realm of speculation, but I think that I would like to think that what the legislators were trying to do was to try and balance that role of care and supervision with the ability of having a medical advisory board with the necessary expertise to be there, to be constituted, so that they might make the right recommendation to the National Commissioner or the parole boards or the minister, as the case may be.
Quick last word from you, given what could have been the rationale or the thinking behind such a move, if indeed it is, as the Commissioner says, is what is allowable.
Vuyo, I do not believe our legislatures gave the Commissioner absolute power to make decision on this issue. The Commissioner act only as a head to append a signature from the recommendation that has been made by his committee. So the legislatures did not give all the powers to him. He shares his powers with his committee that is giving him all the aspects, that is giving him all the recommendations. He needs to take that into account. So he doesn't have an absolute power. However, it has, from 2012, when other politicians were released on the parole, under the parole, it appears that our organ of states, the commissioners, the ministers, they interpret these legislations just to suit a certain narrative. So I do not believe that there is an absolute power. Each power, each organ of state, each minister, each commissioner is accountable for his decision. There are watchdogs, there are people who watch him whatever decision that you take is not taking it as an individual. It takes it in consultation and after taking into account the recommendation of the people who are either lower to his position or take into account the views of the expert. So there's no such a thing as an absolute. The legislature never gave him such powers.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks to both of you for agreeing to come through this evening on a matter, of course, we are all battling to get to the bottom of, try to and understand what exactly went on here. Given Matlombe, who is a criminal lawyer, and Nabila Mia, who is an attorney from the Lawyers for Human Rights. The Watchdog continues in a minute. Don't go away. Well, hot off the press, parliamentarians are agreeing, at least in principle, to look into the circumstances surrounding Jacob Zuma's parole. And joining us now is the leader of the official opposition, John Steenhuisen. John, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. You've written a letter asking that Parliament look at this matter urgently.
Yes, that is in addition to the court papers which we're filing tomorrow for a review of the decision in light of the fact that we now have on good authority by his own admission that Mr. Fraser disregarded the expert panel, the medical panel, in terms of Section 79 of the Act and made his decision to grant the medical parole, despite the fact that medical professionals had indicated that Mr. Zuma did not qualify. And so we'll be filing those papers tomorrow in the North Gauteng High Court, as well as adopting a parliamentary process to summon Mr. Arthur Fraser to Parliament to explain the rationale behind why he chose to override that expert medical opinion and instead to release his erstwhile friend and former boss, Mr. Zuma, from prison on the grounds of medical parole.
I have it on good record that the governing party's study group is receptive to the idea, but of course, I mean, they still have to write to the chief whip, but also considering the fact that all of you are supposed to, from Saturday, start campaigning for your respective political parties, which meant that Parliament was going to close effectively. And how are you going to, on your part, how are you going to propose that you move forward, assuming that indeed everyone agrees that this matter should be looked into urgently?
Some of us have been campaigning for the last 8 months for you, but to say that, look, I think that Parliament's got its role to play and it must do that, but it's not going to deter us from going to the court. Mr. Fraser needs to answer for the reasonableness and rationality of his decision, and I think he's going to have a hard time doing that. So I think Parliament must do its job. But, as I say, we are going to court and going to hopefully get a favourable judgment, because we need to make sure this doesn't happen again. I think post the Zondo Commission, there's going to be a number of well-connected cadres within the ANC who find themselves on the wrong side of the prison bars. And what we don't want is an open door now for people to simply think that they can get a medical parole and on the basis of a political decision rather than a medical decision, because then we have a very dangerous situation in South Africa. We've got one rule of law for the citizens and another rule of law for those in the ANC and the connected few. And I've written an open letter to the president today because I think he needs to answer for his role in this. There's no ways Mr. Fraser would have gone on national television and admitted that he overrode the professional opinions of the Medical Parole Board if he did not know that he had the political cover of Mr. Ramaphosa. And that's what makes me cross as well, is that why were they not honest and upfront about this from the beginning? Their press statement was incredibly misleading. They said that they had followed all the procedures. Well, they hadn't. Why didn't they just admit up front, if they were confident that what they were doing was the right thing, that Mr. Fraser had used his discretion despite the advice to the contrary from the Medical Parole Board? And I think that this is clearly a cover-up, and it's a way to get Mr. Zuma out of jail so he can campaign for the ANC in the upcoming elections.
John Steenhuisen, the leader of the Democratic Alliance, thank you very much for your time this evening. The Watchdog team has it on good authority that this matter and the DA's letter was received favorably by other members of the committee. They are now working on the logistics of making it happen. Let's turn our attention now to this. The body constitutionally mandated to investigate, monitor and evaluate the organization and administration of the public service had a briefing earlier today where they painted a rather unflattering picture of how the state is being run in many instances. And joining us now is Commissioner Fikeni Somadoda. Commissioner, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Well, a lot, of course, of what was discussed at that briefing earlier was already out in the public domain. I mean, you recall that recently Treasury, issued that report which spoke to how 8 of the country's 9 provinces, were failing dismally to, for example, pay service providers on time, and this in spite of what the government has been promising to do, in spite of the the department responsible for small and medium enterprises promising to take this matter to heart and actually do something about. But there were several other issues that were raised or brought to the attention of the public. Just as a commissioner, which of the areas you spoke about in detail today really captured the imagination of the commission?
Well, I do think that the issue of ethics is behind most of the challenges that we see, from patronage to corruption, doing business with the state, which means that all the institutional arrangement and the systems and the rules and the policies we've put in place, if those behind them do not show ethical leadership in trying to enforce what is expected of them, and even when that fails to happen, there is no consequence management, which would show that if you don't follow the law, there are consequences, then that is where the source of the problem is. The life acid demeni, the corruption being revealed in the various commissions and court cases and so forth, is an indication of the lack of that moral code, of the lack of the emphasis of values instead of just rules. We have one of the best progressive constitutions, so it is said by many observers. We have some of the best governance systems, which many countries actually cut and paste. But the problem is in the implementation. That is where ethical leadership, where you internalize the values of the Constitution itself and what role public service ought to play, that to us as the Public Service Commission is at the heart of many of the challenges that we see.
Have you been able to put a finger on it, though? You'd have thought that, new administration came in under this whole ticket, of changing things for the better, on the back of reports, that were written by academics who had studied, what we were going through as a country, told us, how it was all happening, where the problem areas were, what is making, the problems that we see happen, and where we could possibly strengthen through emails, through, whistleblowers, people who were inside the system who understood perfectly what exactly was happening and how to. Now, all this body of knowledge is now with us, so we can't now, no one can say, I didn't know, or I don't I don't know how we got here. So you would have thought that a combination of that, together with the promise that has been made by the current administration that has now been in power for a good couple of years, would at least, would have dealt with some of the problems. And today we will be painting a completely different picture of the state of our public service.
The state of decay and the weakening of institutions take quite some time, sometimes a decade or two. Chains of habit are too weak to be felt until they are too strong to be broken. Right now, we are dealing with a patrimonial system in the main, where patronage, where networks, where people were appointed in some instances for loyalty and also for wrong reasons instead of competence. So undoing that which has been settling in like a boiling frog, which takes some time to feel that the water has become hot. That is the challenge now, where it needs political will, it needs the overhauling of the public, service system. Hence, there is the talk of professionalization of public service, which recognizes these weaknesses, but goes further to say, in the ecosystem of rebuilding that institutional capacity, rebuilding a capable state, you need, from training institutions such as your universities, your business schools, your schools of governance, up to the professional bodies, up to the public service and the systems being re-engineered towards that, and up to the monitoring and evaluation, and of course with the watchful citizenry. That in itself is not something that would be declared today and happen immediately, but there is a sense of urgency though. The crisis we see, unemployment, corruption, poor service delivery and so forth, can only happen if you have a capable state. And that is undergirded by a capable, professional, meritocratic public service.
Now, you have a mandate that you are given by the Constitution. You investigate, you monitor, you evaluate, and all. But do you have what you need as the Public Service Commission to be able to actually deal or correct the wrongs that you are seeing in the system, or get those who can or should correct the wrongs to do so?
Well, we do have that mandate, but that mandate falls short. Maybe it didn't anticipate the fact that as we report to Parliament, as we report to the executives, as we recommend actions to be taken, when you do not see consequence management or actions being taken, just like the AG was sitting with the situation of revealing the mismanagement and the anomalies, the irregular expenditure for years, but it could not take a step further. It might as well be that in some of the reforms of the Public Service, Act, we might have to look at the notion of whether it is sufficient for the Public Service Commission to reveal these, to report about these, to take them to Parliament without consequences, or whether there must be some laws which say Public Service Commission or any other entity for that matter has reported this, accounting authority, executive authority, if you do not take action by this time, these are the consequences, or even your performance management will depend on this. And if you recurringly fail to perform, these are the consequences.
Now, okay, that's one part of the solution, empowering a body like the Public Service Commission, giving it teeth in the manner that you have just described. But what of the other parts or corners of this system? What of their role? For example, I mean, we have a whole department set up to monitor and evaluate, what is going on, which always differs. We tried to get them to come on today because we understand that to be their role as well. Add to that the fact that the president supposedly has, performance agreements with his ministers, which speaks to, again, a point you made about the executive and its role. Is this system working? Are these people, like your Department of Monitoring and Evaluation, doing what it is supposed to do? Does the president, we've never really heard anything from him about, this or the other minister having failed the test, or not done what they were supposed to do, and there being consequences, for the non-performers. Just from where you sit, are the other parts, of this whole system, especially those that are actually tasked with this monitoring and evaluation of the performance of the public service, doing what they're supposed to do?
Well, I don't think it would be Public Service Commission's, role at this point to pass such judgment, but we do actually monitor and evaluate. And it's one of the things we want to engage government on, to say it might as well do well if this process of monitoring and evaluation was more transparent, of contracting of the executive authorities was more transparent, in a sense of saying these are the targets and these are the reasons for not meeting the targets, and these are the reasons where there is performance or lack of performance. In that way, we wouldn't be where we are, because even the citizenry and the public would know well in advance that minister in this department has committed to the following. But as far as we are concerned at this stage, there is a need of overhauling of many systems in the ecosystem of public administration itself, such that you do have a more transparent system where we can see things happening, things not happening, and therefore the consequences follow, or we know why Minister A or Minister B is not performing because of this particular justification and what is being done about that. But it is very important to recognize the fact that even the president and the executive itself has recognized and even now prioritized the fact that institutional capacity of the state is at the heart of everything. If you don't attend to it, any policy pronouncement is just a rhetorical pronouncement. Any service delivery protest is not going to be responded to because the state doesn't have the capacity. So it is a very important step that now it has been put as the fundamental priority. I do know that what was making headlines would be state-owned companies which have billions and billions, and many other entities which are dealing with huge transactions, but we're failing to understand the institutional capacity is at the base of that.
Now, assuming then some of the things you're talking about, get done. Let's say Public Service Commission gets, to have more teeth. Let's say our legislators, to buy into this thing, not only into what you're putting before them, but into the urgency of it as well. Assuming that indeed in the executive, the president gets to, crack the whip, and broadly across the executive, there is this political willingness to turn things around. How agile is the entire system fundamentally to be able to actually go where it is being driven?
Well, I do think that if you have developed institutional culture of lethargy over a long period and you have patronage networks, you wouldn't have that agility. But that agility would come if you do have leadership at both political and administrative level, which is daring, which is audacious, which is very clear about its vision and push for that which is right. We've seen some small moments of that during the World Cup, where you all of a sudden saw the system functioning seamlessly just for the few months when we had the visitors in the country, when everybody expected everything to fall apart. We would want to see the repetition of that and the upscaling of that, but the whole system needs to be overhauled. The tone, though, must be set at the very top. And that ethical leadership, where people lead by example, is key.
Oh, well, you're right. We did see that. We did see many pockets of, excellence within the system. But as we subsequently discovered after, the World Cup, some people were in fact incentivized elsewhere to actually move with speed when it came to delivering some of those good things we saw.
True. Remember that, as we said, we essentially have a corrupt system. But that corrupt system is also not delivering on services in many respects. But that you had efficiency in other areas during that period cannot be entirely attributed to people getting some kickbacks. We had court cases which were quickly attended to. We had many other things which were done timeously. Of course, at the back of that, you also had corruption. That is a matter of public record. But we should not, because you have this considerable amount of patronage and corruption, condemn every other good and positive action. Take Home Affairs, for example. At some point, people were taking months and months and months to receive their documents. But you were beginning to see some reforms and some cumulative effect of that. The question is how to replicate those. And it does not mean even those particular departments mentioned are without problems.
And that's where we're going to leave it this evening. Public Service Commissioner Dr. Somadoda Figeni, they held a briefing earlier where they raised quite a number of issues that are afflicting the public service, a lot of it from reports that were submitted by various government departments. But another problem which they also highlighted was the fact that some of these departments and entities were in fact not compliant. They were not handing over the reports that the Public Service Commission and other entities wanted from them. A situation that Dr. Fikeni says hopefully will be corrected sooner rather than later, and that the sense of urgency that he was talking about, and there'll be leadership from the front, a willingness to actually correct these wrongs. That's where we're going to leave it this evening. Do join us again tomorrow night at 8 o'clock sharp. Have a good night.